What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. As you can tell, we're back down in the grow room. As much as I'd like to be back outside, it snowed today. So, Mother Nature had other plans for us. I really wanted to get outside so I could talk about our solar composting pile, but unfortunately, like I've said in the past couple episodes, we haven't had any sun in about 2 weeks now. So without any sun, it's not really doing a whole lot, and it'll be pretty underwhelming to show you guys that. So we'll wait until the sun comes out and it starts working again. But it is working really well, and I'm super excited about it. So just stay patient, like I've had to be patient, and eventually we'll feature it. But what am I doing today? Well, today I came down in the grow room, and I wanted to talk about some additional mistakes that I see so many gardeners making when seed starting. So this is going to be kind of our part two. Well, not kind of, it will be our part two. We did another, our first part went over super well. You guys absolutely loved it and asked for a part two. So I figured I'd make that happen. But I didn't want to just talk about mistakes I see people making, because I also had some stuff that I really needed to get done. I needed to get some more basil cuttings taken and rooted for our setups. Let's get into today's video. So what I wanted to talk about, obviously, like I mentioned, were mistakes that I see way too many gardeners making when seed starting. This time of year, a lot of people, they start to see spring on the horizon, and they get really excited about seed starting. I think the first mistake, kind of the most obvious mistake, is they start too soon. But you see, we already talked about starting too soon. That was in the first episode. What I really want to talk about is starting the wrong plants too soon. You see, there's certain plants where you can start them quite a bit in advance, like peppers, tomatoes, herbs, things that tend to grow pretty slowly, and they need a long time to get mature so you can plant them out in the garden and have any chance of really getting a long season out of them. Planting too soon when it comes to things like lettuces, cabbages, broccolis, your cold weather crops that can handle the cooler temperatures outside, I see way too many people planting those indoors like 5 to 7 weeks in advance. I'm sorry, but you really don't have to do that. Unless you live in Arizona where your temperatures just absolutely spike, that'd be the only place I could see this being remotely necessary. If you live in an area where you have weather that gets warm really fast and it gets hot just so fast that it fries plants and causes them all to bolt and go to seed, I could see that as an exception. But I'm really talking about, I would say, the 85 to 90% of us that don't live in those areas that I see people starting lettuce right now, and we're talking 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date. It's completely unnecessary. And why is that? Well, the biggest thing is that lettuce can handle the cool temperatures. It's a cool weather crop. Start it 2 or 3 weeks before your last frost date, but don't start it like 7 to 8 weeks. Number one, you're gonna have a plant that is gonna be so big and so stressed that as soon as you move it outside, it's really going to actually stunt the growth in the long run. Second thing is that it's going to go to seed if it's stressed. So you're actually going to get less harvest. On top of being stunted and slow to grow, it could possibly go to seed, and then you've completely lost your harvest. And then the third thing is I always look at the space that I have available and really the stuff that I should be starting indoors as top priority. If you have all the space in the world to be sacrificing, okay, it's probably not, aside from those other risks, it going to seed, it being stressed and things like that, assuming everything goes right, I typically don't even start lettuce indoors anyways, because I'd rather start it outside because it can handle the cooler temperatures, and I'd rather use the space to grow things like tomatoes and peppers. Now that's solely my opinion, but I still would never start it in advance 6 to 7 weeks. It's just not necessary. The second mistake I see way too many gardeners making when seed starting is worrying about growing zones. Now this one, I can go on and on and on about. This has been a big pet peeve of mine for a super long time, and we've done several videos on this, but this definitely ties into seed starting because I see a lot of gardeners that are saying, what seeds should I be starting in zone 8? What seeds should I be starting in zone 5? Folks, let me get on a little diatribe here for a second. Zones have nothing to do with when you should be starting. Zones don't have anything to do with the seeds you should be starting. Zones don't have to do with anything other than perennials. If you're growing a perennial, worry about what zone you're in. If you're not growing a perennial, don't worry about it. If you're growing anything other than a perennial, all you have to worry about is the days to maturity, how long your growing season is. That will dictate when you should be starting your seed. Because you could be in zone, say you're in zone 5 and you're up in the mountains in Colorado. Well, we're here in zone 5 in Michigan. It's vastly different. It's vastly different in terms of when we should be planting things. Because in zone 5 just dictates how cold the average temperature gets in winter. That's all it dictates. It doesn't dictate how long the season is. The zone 5 in Colorado is actually about 30 to 40 days shorter than zone 5 here. Same zone, but the growing time is 30 to 40 days shorter. So you're going to have to accommodate for that with when you start your stuff or the type of stuff that you do start, because the season is much shorter. All right, and the third mistake I see way too many gardeners making is overwatering. This is a common mistake, very, very common. I've overwatered. I'm sure if you have had a garden for any length of time, you've also overwatered. We all do it, but it is a very common, misconception that your plants need as much water indoors as they would outdoors. It's just not the case. There is not as much wind. There is not as much sun. There is not as much anything. Anything that you have indoors is far less than what you have outside. And all of those conditions, wind, sun, humidity, things like that, all of that plays into account how much you're going to be watering. On windy days, you'll find that you have to water far more frequently than non-windy days, and that's because wind carries with it moisture. On really hot, sunny days, the sun is going to beat down on the soil and cause more evaporation. And so, again, it's not something that you have to worry about as much indoors. And a lot of people, they'll water every other day indoors. The problem with that is that when you overwater, you cause more harm than good. You're going to cause root rot. You're going to cause damping off with your seedlings. Damping off can be seen by your seedling growing up, and then just as soon as it starts to sprout, it looks really great, and it falls over. Big mistake I see way too many gardeners making, and that's the leading cause of it, is just watering too much. So don't do that, please. Make sure when you water, if you start with a really good potting mix, like this stuff here that we have our basil plants put in, this right here is Pro Mix. I absolutely love Pro Mix. It's our #1 potting mix of choice because it's just got a great composition of perlite, vermiculite, peat moss, and just great all-around texture. And it really holds on to water really well. If you're starting with a really good mix, I find, honestly, I only water once a week, maybe twice a week at most indoors. That's how little I water. And so, but I see people watering like every other day, if not every day, and it's just not necessary. Another thing that's going to happen is that if you use something that has organic matter in the mix, it's going to start molding and actually growing fungus. And that is another mistake, which is actually the fourth mistake. You don't want to use soil indoors because it will mold and create fungus. When you use a potting mix, you want to go with something that is soilless. Now, a lot of gardeners, they don't understand what soilless means because this looks like soil. In these containers, that looks like soil to me. It's actually not. This is just peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, and then just a little bit of fertilizer in there. That's it. There's no soil in there. If you take compost from outside, there's far too much organic matter, and a lot of people like to use it because, well, hey, I'm an organic gardener. I'd want to grow organically, right? The problem is indoors, it just doesn't fly. Without it drying out adequately, without having really good ventilation, if you overwater, you're going to have things like mushrooms growing. You're going to have, which, sounds cool, but it's really not good for your plants. It means that there's something going on within the soil that's it's just getting too much water. It's not drying out. There's not enough ventilation. But same thing with damping off, any type of fungus or rot or mold, something like that. You really don't want that, and you're going to get that with things like compost. If you have soil inside of your mix, it's going to cause a lot of issues. So try to not do that. I see a lot of people that make the mistake of going out and buying bagged compost to start their seeds in. It's just not ideal. It's going to hold on to way too much moisture, and that does tie into part 3 that we talked about. The fifth mistake I see way too many gardeners making is over-fertilizing. This is a huge mistake that I see, again, way too many gardeners making, and assuming that your plants are going to need tons of fertilizer to get started. It's just not the case. Your plants do not need lots of fertilizer when they're starting out. In fact, you're actually going to do more harm than good, and that's why even if you're using an organic-based fertilizer, start out gentle. And that's because your plants, they're not fully mature plants. They don't need all of that fertilizer right away. And what you're going to do is even the most gentle fertilizer, you can cause the plant to grow too fast. And indoors, you want nice, steady, slow growth. You don't want to just make them explode right away because, again, the secret is to not stress them out too much. If you encourage too much growth indoors and then you move them outdoors, we talked about this in the first episode of mistakes I see too many gardeners making. And what you don't want to do is you don't want a fully mature giant plant because it's going to cause more stress. Sorry about that, my phone started ringing. And so the sixth mistake I see way too many gardeners making is using a heat mat for longer than they need. It is not necessary to leave a heat mat on for prolonged periods of time. One of the biggest mistakes I see is just leaving the heat mat on even when the plants are growing. This does a couple things. One, the heat underneath the plant will actually cause stress. When you have your heat mat turned on, those are usually dialed in to right around 85 to 90 degrees. That's pretty warm, but it's ideal for seed starting because they germinate better in warm temperatures. However, once the plants are started, it's not necessary, and that can actually cause adverse effects. It's going to stress the root system out because the soil is very warm. Warm soil above 80 degrees is typically not preferred, even for things like tomatoes and peppers. If you have soil outside in the garden on a really hot summer day, if you have good soil moisture, stick a thermometer in your soil. You'll find that the temperature is right around 70 to 75 degrees. And that's because the moisture in the soil keeps things climate controlled. Really good soil that's rich in humus and organic matter, has good aeration. All of that is a really good insulator. And it's not going to be nearly as hot as the outside temperature. And so if you have soil that's being heated from below, there's nowhere for that heat to go but up. And you're going to just basically cook the roots. They're going to be very stressed. The second thing that's going to happen is that heat, like we talked about in point 3 or 4 or something along those lines when we talked about temperature, the water that you add, if you are watering rather infrequently, it's going to cause you to have to water very regularly because the heat from underneath actually causes more evaporation. So you're going to be watering more frequently as well, which again raises the risk of root rot and disease. And it also breeds bad bacteria because bacteria breed in really warm temperatures. So bad bacteria like damping off, root rot nematodes, things like that, they're going to thrive, and as well as funguses as well. They're all going to thrive in damp soil that's nice and warm. You're basically creating a petri dish. So don't do that. And then the very final thing that I forgot about, the seventh thing that is a huge mistake I see way too many gardeners making is leaving a humidity dome on. So this is the same kind of the problem that you have with the heat mat, is you get a lot of these kind of beginning seed starting kits that comes with a humidity dome, your cell trays, and your heat mats, and all of it kind of all in one. This is not necessary to use the kit the whole time you're growing indoors. If you have a heat mat, after the seeds sprout, unplug it. After your seeds germinate and you go maybe a week or two with the seeds growing, take the humidity dome off. Because the humidity dome is going to trap too much moisture near the leaves and you're going to have fungus and mildew in a heartbeat. Humid conditions are one of the fastest ways to breed fungus and mildew. That's going to kill your plants. The second thing it's going to do is it's going to stress the plants out because they're growing in such a perfect environment, if you can get it dialed in right, that then once you take off the humidity dome, they go because they don't have the humidity anymore. So it's best to give them kind of that environment that they're going to experience when you move them outside, because you don't want to go from a perfect kind of like just an incubator type situation into here you go, I'm throwing you to the wolves. That type of shock is not what you want to have healthy plants. So that's the 7 things that I see way too many gardeners making mistakes when seed starting. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. I got to get these some water so they can start rooting. And I hope you guys enjoyed. All right, I'll catch you all on the next episode. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. We'll catch y'all later. See ya. Bye.